fleshing out with him is done. Got a little bit more to do, and I'm going to work on him once he gets up on the stretching rack. Well, he's taut like a drum. It's going to be easier to remove the rest of the fat from the hide. So we're going to work on sewing up holes. Now, these were not holes that I punched in him. These were holes that were punched in him while he was his hide was being taken off of the carcass to process out for meat. So the hide will tan out a lot better, a lot more evenly, a lot more symmetrically if these holes are basically punched up and cleaned up. You kind of got to be Dr. Frankenstein a little bit with these, but it's important to be able to do if you really want a pretty hide. So we're going to start out with a relatively large laceration, large tear in here. When some of the cuts become very, very jagged, this becomes a little bit more difficult. So I'm going to start out with a relatively simple, relatively basic hole. This hole here, as you can see, is probably about 4 inches long and is a relatively clean cut. So I'm going to use some just simple dental floss and a tapestry needle, mattress needle, buckskin needle. Any type of large sewing needle works really good. And you're going to want something like a thimble or something like that. A piece of wood works, thimble works, the handle of your knife works, a little rock, anything will work to help push this needle through the hide. So we're going to tan this one out next. So because this is a large laceration, I want this thing to come together very clean. I want the lines of the laceration to come together evenly. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to stack the deck in my favor, and I'm going to lace up the middle of the laceration first. I always start out on the flesh side. I don't want to start going through the hair side. It makes things a bit more challenging. So as you've seen before, I like to work on my knee. I'm going to tuck all the hair in as much as possible. I'm going to find the relative middle of the laceration starting from both ends. This is always a little bit challenging to do. About the middle, and I'm going to push the needle right through the edge, if you can see this. I've got about an 8-inch piece of dental floss. I'm going to try to come directly across so it ends up nice and even. Yeah, which is about right there. Okay, so I'm going to start pushing through. Very challenging to do this with just my fingers, so I'm going to use some type of thimble to do this. You'd be surprised at how thick bear hide is. I'm surprised, but how easily a hole is punctured in it. So, real simple at this point. Any type of knot will work. I'm going to do a surgeon's knot on this big bad boy. Now all I'm doing with this is pretty much bringing it together. I'm probably not going to use this hole again. I'm just going to sew around it. I want to get as much of the hair out of it as I can. Okay, and we're just going to leave. Whoops, did I sew it into it? So I'm holding it in place like that for now. So I've got a little bit longer piece of lacing that I'm going to start actually lacing this thing up. Now, if you feel more comfortable with this, you could put another 2 stitches right here to bring the whole laceration together better. There's an infinite number of ways you can do this. I can pretty much see what I want to do, so I'm just going to put one in the middle. So I've got 2 sections to work on. I'm going to lace this little guy up. Now I've got a big knot in one end. I just did a whole bunch of overhand knots in one end like this. This is a way to do it and my way to do it, not the way to do it. So what I'm going to do is start out right here in the corner. Make sure that this is fleshed out really good. If there's any fat on here, as much of it as possible kind of needs to come up. Kind of needs to come up. If not, it'll be a lot harder to get everything to flesh out nicely and then to tan out nicely. So, make sure all the fat is off of the edges that you're going to sew up. So you got the basic idea. I've already fleshed this out. I thought I fleshed it out. Still got a little bit of fat on there. Colored dental floss, if you can find it, really helps you out a lot. White is not the best if you have options, because it's harder to see it. So when you go back and flesh this animal out when it's up on the stretching rack, I've cut through the stitching several times. So getting pink or green dental floss sometimes is actually really nice if you have it available. I'm going to start out on this side. So this is the end of the laceration right here. So depending on how big the laceration is and how tight you want it to be is how far apart I want these stitches to be. I'm going to do these probably about 3/16 of an inch, maybe a shade tighter. So I'm going to start right here in the corner. If you're going to punch yourself, this is usually where it's going to be, is right here at the beginning. Try to get as much of the hair out as possible. Try to bring that end together. Now, because I've got basically just a stopper knot in one end, I'm just going to bring this whole mess together. Okay. How far I would go apart between the stitches, again, is depending on how tight I want this thing to come together. The larger the hide, the less concerned you have to be. If you're doing a really, really small animal, you want to be a little bit more mindful of that. So there was my first lace. I'm going to come about right here. You can always get your multi-tool or a pair of needle nose pliers to help you out with this. The easiest way to not have to do this is when you flesh whatever animal it is you're doing out, be patient and be mindful about it so you don't have to fix anything. Oh, there we go. So it's coming together pretty clean. Now, if you find that you're going a little farther on one side, a little shorter on one side, and it doesn't look like it's going to come together clean, you can always back your stitches up. Just reverse it and start over. This hide will deal with it. They're pretty thick. The bear grease, the fat, really does make this challenging. Makes your fingers really slippery. The more time you spend putting this thing together correctly and preparing the hide, the easier it's going to tan out and the prettier it's going to be when it's all said and done. I'm still being very careful to look for fat that wasn't cleaned up enough or getting the hair tucked up inside there. You can leave these dental floss, these waxed dental floss sutures in here when the hide's done. I probably would. It'll help keep it together. It's up to you though. You don't have to, but I typically would like to. And if you're sewing with waxed nylon dental floss like this, it's never gonna rot. It's not like using anything natural, anything organic. You can use fishing line too. Fishing line is a little bit harder to tie up, I think, but knots up really good if you get decent monofilament fishing line. going to keep pulling them apart, seeing, yeah, that's coming together pretty clean. Keep pulling in different directions and see if it looks like what you're trying to do is what you're doing. If not, you can always back your lacing up, just reverse it, and start over. Yeah, that's looking pretty clean. I'm going to put one more stitch in this side and then go to the other side. It's really miserable trying to do this on the head, on the hump in particular, because the hide's about ½ an inch thick on a big bear like this. It's like doing an American bison. So, there we go. That's pretty much what I'm looking for. Remove all the other stuff to make sure I'm looking at what I'm looking at. Yeah, that came together pretty nice. So I could just continue the lacing the way I've been doing, or I can start from the other side. I already started this side right here. As you can see, I've got a bunch of options. So basically what the goal is when it's all said and done, have this laced up and make it very hard to see it, very, very hard to pick it out on here. That will make sure that the hide strings up more evenly and tans out more evenly. There you go. I'm just going to keep lacing them up like yeah. Now, I do have a couple more to do on here. So once we're done with this, with patching up these holes and playing Dr. Frankenstein, we're going to go ahead and put him up on the stretching rack and do our secondary fleshing, which is removing all the rest of these little fatty deposits that we didn't get. And that's where the trick on doing a bear hide is you have to get as much of that off as absolutely possible. If not, your hide is not going to soak up your brain solution. And bears are arguably one of the most difficult animals in North America to do this with because there's so much fat. It's so much work to do. But that's also the beauty of it, is when it's all said and done, you have a wonderful, wonderful, beautiful hide. All right. Now look at it again. Yeah, that's going to come together nice. It's going to come together nice and clean. There's my tails on my dental floss sutures. Yeah, he's going to pull together real nice. Remember when we started, he was about yay big. By yay, can't even tell it. There was laceration there.